let's move on to the next social network, which is Twitter. So Twitter will, once we start doing a very similar exercise in the same folder, we're going to build on the Open Graph folder again for the next exercise. You'll see that we have to do only a little bit of extra work to make things look great for Twitter. For one, like they are now officially, they're honoring Open Graph tags. So for title and description, you can put that in there once and you make both of these parties happy. There are a couple different tags that we do have to add, and there's a little bit different treatment of images because they want a different size than what we give Facebook. So we're going to cover all of that ground that you need to layer on top of this thing that we've already built to make it show up on Twitter in as rich a way as possible. But first, let's talk about these three tags. So we've got card, site, and creator. When we think about card, this is almost like the equivalent of the OG:type meta tag that we use for Open Graph. And this really has a strong effect. It has a big effect on how your card is rendered. So this is what you get if you have a Twitter card of type summary. You provide an image of the right size, right? You get something that looks like this. If we go with the summary large image card, you get a much larger image, like a more widescreen orientation instead of a square, and the title and description are placed underneath it. So whenever possible, like large images are going to get way more engagement. So you want to, unless like you have some constraint where you've only got tiny little images and they look like crap when you size them up, like aim for this. People will want to click on it much more. In addition, so those two work on any site. We're going to be able to get those working today. There is another type that you have to ask for permission to be whitelisted for, and that is a player card. And so this is one that I use for my talks, my conference talks that I put on my website, where you get a video player that's embedded right in the tile, and you can click that play button and it will work. There are ways to get your keyframe to show up properly. So that's a good video tip here, by the way. Make sure that the keyframe of your video is, which is sort of like the image that is there before you start playing the video. Oftentimes you can upload an image that's not an actual frame of the video, and you can have like the title across it and a little picture of yourself or whatever is appropriate there, but you can use it almost like the cover of a DVD where like it's an opportunity to sort of decorate things and brand them a little bit. In this case, I have screwed that up. It is still screwed up, right? I don't claim to be someone that practices what I preach, but all of these things I'm describing to you are on my to-do list. So it is nice though that I can share a conference talk and then someone right within the Twitter app can start playing it and it'll start playing. I'm not hosting my own videos. I figured out a combination where, so part of what you have to provide when you use the player card is the URL of a video, right? Like the actual source of the video file. And then you can say like, here is the URL of the web page containing that video. So I found a middle ground here where I shared a YouTube video and I figured out from a YouTube video ID the form of that URL for the source video. So I'm pointing to YouTube for that, but I'm pointing to my own site for like if you clicked on the body of this card, you would go there, not to YouTube. So you can find a nice little medium there where you sort of hedge between like I don't want to host my own video because that's not my business. Front-end masters would certainly host their own video, right? Yes?
If you were doing this kind of thing, like, would you have the impulse to put your video as like a 2-minute like preview thing, or would you actually want the player to have your full however many hours video?
That is a great question. So if we go back to being objective driven, and I'm sorry, I'm not picking on you. I know it's the second time I've used that as the response here. You want people to eventually end up on your site, right? So maybe you've got like intercom or some embedded chat and you want to try to engage with them. And maybe you have a call to action that you're ultimately trying to get people to sign up. oftentimes it's useful to have a public video that's available that you're sharing, and then at the end you can have some of these little hot zones where you can like click right within the video surface where they can like pick up from there and see the full thing. But that will be a link to your site where you might have, like if you're using YouTube, you'd have an unlisted video that's embedded in your site. So people couldn't come across that via organic search, but they will be able to see the whole thing on your site. The downside there is that's 2 videos with 2 sets of ratings. And so if someone like shares this, or they like it, like you don't know if they're gonna like it in the preview or like both of them. And so it's sort of a judgment call. This would be a good thing to split test for sure. I think if your primary product is videos, like I wouldn't hesitate to show the whole thing. But if it's just, sorry, if your primary product is videos, I would do a teaser and then the full thing on your site. If, in my case, my primary thing is training people, and so if I give a talk at like Fluent about web security, I'm fine with that being public. I've already given it out in a public setting, and in fact, the conference has probably already published it. So at least here, though, I will tend to, sorry, conference organizers, I will tend to post it on my own site and share that rather than sharing it from their site, because I want the traffic to come into me.
So it'd be the question between like if it's more interesting to the objective to get people into your actual website versus I want a view on this video.
If you want a view on the video, put the video out there. If you want people to come to your website, give them a delicious little breadcrumb, and then they'll follow you into their site. But then carefully craft that thing to where like that video is wrapping up with like more available, like here are the things we're going to cover, and make it a proper call to action at the end rather than just like for more click here. Like make it enticing and put that in the video, right? Make the pitch to them like with a person, right? But a great card here. It's not hard. They don't really there are no qualifications to having to put the player card in here, except that you must have already put the metadata in place and then submit it to Twitter. And they just want to see that you have set your stuff up properly. My suspicion is it may be just a bandwidth concern on their end, where they don't want like tons of people putting themselves forward as like, we have these player cards and here are tons of videos, and it's just an attempt to get people to engage more, but really it's not real content, if that makes sense. Because it's a heavier file to download than an image. Yeah.
When you say you're asking for permission, are you asking for permission per page
per
or
domain.
per like source?
Per domain.
Per domain.
So your domain has to be whitelisted.
Okay.
So if I'll show you an example of the rejection notice we get from the Heroku URLs. They probably want it to be like, it's nice for it to be an HTTPS domain, because then they can see like, oh, this person bought an SSL certificate. Maybe they're, an extended validation thing that. I don't know what the verification process is. All I know is I haven't really heard of people getting rejected from it, and it took me about 2 days for them to come back, right? And I just have conference talks on there. It's not a huge, I'm not a huge money maker in terms of people watching these things. There's another kind of Twitter card called an app card, and it links to an app store of some sorts. If you look closely at this, you can see that we see a rating at the bottom of the description that tells us how many reviews there are and what the average review was. And you'll want to use one of these services that will, based on user agent, send people to the appropriate app store link. You get one URL to use here as like what you're sharing. And obviously like some people need the iPhone app, some people need the Android app, and there are plenty of services, and people sometimes build their own services where you hit them, and then if it looks like an Android device, you go here, and iOS goes there. So there were 2 meta tags that I showed you when we first started going through Twitter, and they were site and creator. These are not visible currently, but I wanted to show you the 2013 API, the 2013 look and feel of Twitter, because at any time, Twitter could change their UI. And you want your metadata to be in place so that if they start to resurface some of these things, which, by the way, these are things they still ask people to do, they still recommend that you place these meta tags in your HTML, they may elect to surface these again. So what we're seeing here is it is a tweet or a link that was shared that is associated with a Twitter account called the webmate. So that would be like the site. That's the site, the webmate, right? And you can see they get a link and their Twitter avatar next to that, because we basically say this is the site's Twitter account. This corresponds with this Twitter account. Below that, the second arrow points to the actual author who has their own Twitter account, so they get credit for writing this article as well. So that is the disambiguation between a creator and a site. Usually it will be a business and then an individual person that is the author. And again, you will not see these pieces of data showing up in April 2017 Twitter UI that I can tell, and I've only checked Windows and web, or I've checked like the Windows native app, the OS X native app, and the web experience and the iOS app. So maybe it's on Android, but at some point it looked like this, and at any time it could go back. So strongly advise you put it in there if it's pertinent. And this would be for like the New York Times fine arts page, and here's the author. That's the appropriate context for this.
As a note on that, for a while they were actually using that as a permission into Twitter Analytics.
Yes, so this is still definitely used in Twitter Analytics. It's just not surfaced to users. So that's a good benchmarking tool, right? For like which of my authors are writing about the hottest things that are getting the most engagement, but it's not visible in user land as far as I know. So the image requirements for Twitter are a little different than Facebook. So for the summary image, right, that was the first card that I showed you with the small square image to the left of the textual part of the little rich card. So that's 150 by 150 pixel square. And then you need 560 by 300 to use a summary large image. You need to cover that area, exceed both dimensions, right? If you provide an insufficiently large image for summary large image, you'll fall back to the summary card style, and you may note that like one is a square image and one is almost a 2:1 aspect ratio. So the crop job, it looks awful. I mean, it's just going to take the middle. It's going to turn into a Dern's course on social optim, which is not what I'm teaching here. We're not learning about Dern's here.